Tonight, we're stepping into a world where wisdom comes at the price of flesh, where gods carve creation from the corpse of giants, and where a one-eyed wanderer walks between worlds seeking knowledge that might delay the end of everything. This is the story of Odin, the Allfather, the god who gave more than any other in pursuit of understanding, and whose shadow stretches across every corner of Norse mythology, from the first spark of creation to the final flames of Ragnarok. If this helps you rest, feel free to like the video and subscribe, and let me know in the comments who your favorite Norse god is. Now settle in. Let the fires of Muspelheim flicker in your mind's eye. Let the ice of Niflheim cool your thoughts. And let's begin at the very beginning, before Odin was the All-Father, before he was even born, when the cosmos itself was just taking its first trembling breath. Long before Odin walked the 9 worlds, before his ravens flew and his wolves hunted, before Valhalla's golden doors swung open to receive the first fallen warrior, there was only the void. The ancient Norse called it Ginnungagap, the yawning gap, a space of absolute nothingness that existed between 2 primordial realms. To the north lay Niflheim, a land of ice and freezing mist, where 11 rivers called the Elvaga flowed from a spring called Vergelmir. To the south burned Muspelheim, a realm of fire and heat guarded by the fire giant Surtur with his flaming sword. For ages beyond counting, these 2 realms existed in opposition, heat and cold, fire and ice, with only the endless void between them. But nature abhors a vacuum, and even in those early days, the universe had its own inevitable momentum. The ice rivers of Niflheim began to flow toward the void, and as they did, they froze, layer upon layer of frost building up in the darkness. From the south, the heat of Muspelheim began to radiate outward, and where the fire met the ice, something extraordinary happened. The ice began to melt, water dripped into the void, and from those first drops of water, infused with the magic of creation itself, came the first being, a primordial giant named Ymir. He was neither god nor mortal, neither fully male nor female, but something older, something from which all else would spring. As Ymir slept in that space between fire and ice, he began to sweat, and from his sweat came more giants, the first of the frost giants, the Hotnar, who would become both the enemies and the relations of the gods to come. But Ymir was not alone for long. From the same melting ice emerged a cow, Audhumla, whose name meant nourisher. She licked the salty ice blocks, and her milk fed Ymir as he slept and grew. As Audhumla continued to lick the ice, something began to emerge from the frozen blocks. On the first day, hair appeared. On the second day, a head. And by the third day, she had freed an entire man from the ice, beautiful and strong. His name was Buri, and he was the first of the gods. Buri had a son named Bor, and Bor took as his wife a giantess named Bestla, daughter of the giant Bolthorn. This marriage between the divine and the giant would set a pattern that would echo through Norse mythology for ages to come, for the gods and the giants were never truly separate, always intertwined by blood and fate and ancient grudges. From this union came 3 sons, 3 brothers who would reshape the cosmos itself. Their names were Odin, Vili, and Ve. Now the stories don't tell us much about Odin's childhood, if gods can even be said to have childhoods. We don't know what games he played, or what lessons his mother taught him, but we do know that from the very beginning, Odin was different. Where his brothers were content with what was, Odin always sought what could be. Where they saw the world as it existed, he imagined what it might become. And that quality, that relentless drive to know more, to understand deeper, to see further, would define every choice he would make for the rest of his immortal existence. The young gods looked around at the world that existed, such as it was. Ymir and his frost giant descendants dominated everything, multiplying and spreading, chaotic and primordial. There was no order, no structure, no cosmos as we would understand it, just giants and ice and the ever-present heat from distant Muspelheim. And Odin, looking at this chaos with his sharp, piercing gaze, made a decision that would echo through eternity. The giants had to go, or at least their dominance had to end. Creation needed room to breathe. The slaying of Ymir. The decision to kill Ymir was not made lightly, though the myths don't dwell on any hesitation or moral quandary. In the world of Norse mythology, necessity often trumped sentiment, and the necessity was clear. The cosmos could not truly begin until the primordial chaos was brought to heel. So Odin and his brothers Vili and Ve approached the sleeping Ymir, the ancient giant whose sweat had spawned a race, whose very existence predated the concept of gods, and they slew him. The myths don't specify exactly how they did it. There are no elaborate descriptions of a cosmic battle, no lengthy struggle between the young gods and the ancient giant. Perhaps it was quick, a sudden violence in the grey space between fire and ice. Perhaps Ymir never even woke. But however it happened, the result was the same. The primordial giant died, and from his death, the world was born. The blood flowed from Ymir's wounds in such vast quantities that it drowned nearly all of the frost giants, a great deluge that swept them away into nothingness. Only one giant survived with his wife, managing to escape in a boat made from a hollowed tree trunk. His name was Bergelmir, and from him the race of giants would continue, forever bearing a grudge against the gods who had murdered their progenitor and nearly extinguished their entire race. But Odin and his brothers were not finished. They had killed Ymir, yes, but now they would use him. In an act of cosmic recycling that would seem brutal if it weren't so creative, they began to fashion the world from the giant's corpse. This was not desecration in their eyes. This was transformation. This was the raw material of chaos being shaped into the ordered cosmos. They took Ymir's flesh, vast and ancient, and from it they formed the earth itself, Midgard, the middle realm where humans would one day walk. The soil was his meat, rich and dark and fertile. His blood became the seas and the lakes, the rivers and the streams, all the waters of the world flowing from that first violence. His bones they shattered and scattered, and these became the mountains and the cliffs, the stone foundations of the world. Even his teeth, those that had been broken in his death, were not wasted. They became rocks and pebbles strewn across the landscape. But Odin's vision extended beyond the earth. He looked at Ymir's massive skull and saw not just bone, but potential. They lifted it high above the newly formed earth and set it as the sky itself, a great dome covering all of creation. To hold it in place, they stationed 4 dwarves at the cardinal points, north, south, east, and west. These dwarves, whose names were Nordri, Sudri, Austri, and Vestri, would hold up the heavens for all time, ensuring the sky never fell to crush the world below. Ymir's brains they tossed into the air, and these became the clouds, grey and white, and forever drifting. Thought made vapor, consciousness dissolved into weather. His hair became the trees and the forests, growing from the earth like strands from a scalp, connecting the land to the sky. And his eyebrows, thick and bushy, they formed into a great wall around Midgard, a barrier to protect the realm of humans from the giants who dwelt in the outer regions, in Jotunheim. But even this was not enough. Odin looked at the vault of the sky and saw darkness. He thought of the fires of Muspelheim, still burning in the south, and he had an idea. The brothers gathered sparks and embers from that primordial realm of flame and hurled them into the sky. These became the stars, countless points of light scattered across the darkness, each one a fragment of the first fire, each one illuminating the night. 2 sparks were special, larger and brighter than the rest. These they set into chariots, golden vessels that would race across the sky. One they gave to a maiden named Sul, and she became the sun, riding across the heavens and bringing light to the world. The other they gave to her brother Mani, and he became the moon, following his sister's path but bringing a gentler, silvery light to the darkness. To ensure they would never slow down, never rest, Odin set 2 great wolves to chase them, Skoll, who pursued Sol, and Hati, who hunted Mani. The wolves would chase the chariots across the sky every day and night for all eternity, and at Ragnarok, the end of all things, they would finally catch their prey and devour the sun and moon themselves. Odin stepped back and surveyed what they had created. From death had come life, from chaos had come order, from a single giant had come an entire cosmos. But it was empty still, this new world. Beautiful, yes, with its mountains and seas, its forests and sky, its sun and moon and stars, but empty. They needed inhabitants, the creation of the first humans. Odin and his brothers walked along the shore of the newly formed sea, waves lapping at their feet, the first wind rustling through the first trees. There, on the beach, they found 2 pieces of driftwood, washed up by the tides, weathered and shapeless. One was ash, the other elm. Odin looked at these logs and saw something more than wood. He saw potential once again. They took the wood and began to shape it, carving and forming. But this was no ordinary craftsmanship. This was divine creation. The same impulse that had transformed Ymir's corpse into a cosmos now focused on something smaller, more intimate, more fragile. From the ash log, they formed a man. From the elm, a woman. But they were still just wood, beautiful perhaps in their form, but lifeless, without breath or warmth or thought. So each brother gave them gifts. Odin leaned close to the wooden figures and breathed into them the gift of life itself, the spirit and the soul, the spark that separates the living from the dead. It was called earned, the breath, the vital force. As his breath entered them, their chests began to rise and fall. But they were not yet complete. Vili gave them thought and the power of movement, the ability to think and reason and make choices. Their eyes opened, though they could not yet truly see. Their minds stirred, though they could not yet truly understand. Vol gave them the senses, hearing, sight, speech. He gave them the ability to perceive the world around them, to feel the wind on their skin and the warmth of the sun. He gave them language, the power to name things and to communicate, to share their thoughts and build meaning together. The man they named Ask, which meant ash tree. The woman they named Embla, which might have meant elm, though some scholars think it meant vine. or creeper. These were the first humans, born not from a womb, but from the sea and the trees and the will of the gods. Odin looked at them as they stood on shaking legs, taking their first breaths, seeing the world for the first time. And he felt something. Pride, perhaps, or responsibility, or maybe just curiosity about what these fragile creatures might become. He gave them Midgard as their home, the middle realm protected by Ymir's eyebrows, safe from the giants and the other dangers of the outer realms. There they would live and grow and multiply, building their lives in the shadow of the gods, never quite divine, but never quite ordinary either, for they carried within them the breath of Odin himself. But Odin's work was not finished. A cosmos had been created, humans had been given life, but the structure of reality itself still needed to be established. And at the center of it all, connecting everything, holding the 9 realms together like a great pillar, was Yggdrasil. Yggdrasil, the world tree. Yggdrasil is perhaps the most iconic symbol in all of Norse mythology, a cosmic tree so vast and so ancient that its roots and branches connect all of creation. Its name means Odin's horse, a strange name for a tree until you understand the story we'll come to later of how Odin hung from its branches like a rider on a gallows tree, sacrificing himself to himself in pursuit of forbidden knowledge. The tree was an ash, enormous beyond comprehension, its trunk wider than mountains, its branches reaching up to scrape the vault of heaven and extending out over all the worlds. Some said its leaves never fell, remaining eternally green. Others said its bark wept a honey-sweet dew. 3 great roots held it anchored, each extending into a different realm. The first root reached into Asgard, the realm of the gods, where Odin and his divine kin had built their halls and fortresses. There, at the base of that root, was the Well of Urd, tended by the 3 Norns, mysterious women who wove the fate of all beings, gods and mortals alike. Their names were Urd, Verdandi, and Skuld, representing the past, the present, and the future. Each day they would draw water from the well and mix it with the mud around the tree's roots, watering Yggdrasil to keep it healthy and strong. This was necessary work, for Yggdrasil was under constant assault. The second root extended into Jotunheim, the land of the frost giants, and there it drew from another well, this one called Mimir's Well, a source of profound wisdom guarded by a being named Mimir. We'll return to this well, for it plays a crucial role in Odin's story, a place where he would sacrifice more than most would ever dare to give. The third root delved into Niflheim, that primordial realm of ice and cold, where the spring Hvergelmir bubbled with 11 rivers. But this root was in danger, for coiled around it was a terrible serpent called Nidhogg, who gnawed constantly at the wood, trying to destroy the tree from below. Nidhogg was not alone in his assault. Countless lesser serpents writhed around the root, biting and chewing, doing their part to undermine the foundation of the cosmos. But Yggdrasil endured, and life teemed throughout its branches. A great eagle perched at its very top, surveying all the worlds with wise eyes. Between the eagle's eyes sat a hawk named Vedrfolnir, watching and waiting. A squirrel named Ratatosk scurried up and down the trunk, carrying insults between the eagle at the top and Nidhogg at the bottom, stirring up conflict between them for reasons known only to itself. 4 stags wandered through the branches, nibbling at the leaves and buds, their names Dain, Divalin, Dunir, and Durathror. The tree groaned and creaked, bearing the weight of all 9 worlds. These realms were arrayed throughout its structure, some in the branches, some along the trunk, some among the roots. There was Asgard, home of the gods, Vanaheim, where the Vanir, another tribe of deities, dwelt, Alfheim, realm of the light elves, beautiful and radiant, Midgard, the middle realm of humans, circled by the great serpent Jormungandr, who bit his own tail, Jotunheim, land of the giants, Svartalfheim, where the dark elves work their forges deep underground, Nidavellir, home of the dwarves, master craftsmen who would forge many of the gods' greatest treasures, Muspelheim, the realm of fire, still burning as it had since before creation, and Niflheim, the realm of ice and mist, and the dead. Odin looked upon Yggdrasil and knew that it was more than a tree. It was the axis of creation, the central pole around which everything turned. It was a pathway between worlds, a bridge that could be crossed by those who knew how, and it would become, in time, the site of his greatest sacrifice and his deepest revelation. But before we reach that moment, we need to understand what drove Odin, what hungered inside him that would lead him to such extremes. We need to understand his insatiable, relentless, all-consuming quest for wisdom. The Allfather's hunger. Odin was not like other gods. Thor, his son, was straightforward, powerful, a god of thunder and protection who solved problems with his hammer. Tyr was a god of law and justice, honorable and consistent. Freya brought fertility and prosperity. But Odin was something else entirely. He was called the Allfather, yes, the father of many gods, and the king of Asgard. He sat upon his high seat, Hlidskjalf, from which he could see all the 9 worlds at once, watching everything that transpired. At his shoulders perched 2 ravens, Hugin and Munin, thought and memory, who would fly out each day and return to whisper in his ears all they had seen and heard. At his feet lay 2 wolves, Geri and Freki, both names meaning greedy, who he would feed from his table, for Odin himself rarely ate, sustained by wine alone. He carried a spear named Gungnir, forged by dwarves, which never missed its mark. He rode an 8-legged horse named Sleipnir, the fastest steed in all the worlds, born in a strange tale from Loki's shape-shifting mischief. He owned a ring called Draupnir that would create 8 new golden rings every 9th night, a symbol of his wealth and power. He ruled from a great hall called Valaskjalf and another called Valhalla, though we'll return to that later. On the surface, he seemed like any king of gods, powerful and wise, surrounded by symbols of authority and strength. But beneath that surface, something else drove him, something that set him apart from every other god in the Norse pantheon. Odin was afraid, not of enemies, not of giants or monsters or other gods. Odin was afraid of ignorance. He was terrified of not knowing, and more than that, he was haunted by knowledge of the future, by the prophecy of Ragnarok, the twilight of the gods, when everything would burn and fall and die. He knew it was coming. He knew that he himself would fall, devoured by a monstrous wolf, and he knew that there was likely nothing he could do to stop it. But knowing it was likely impossible didn't stop him from trying. Odin spent his entire existence seeking knowledge that might change fate, that might give him an edge, that might let him see just a little bit further ahead. He consulted the dead, raising them from their graves to question them. He spoke with giants and sorcerers. He practiced Seder, a form of magic associated with women, which brought him shame among the warrior gods, but which he pursued anyway because it gave him power and insight. He was a god of many contradictions. He was a king who often wandered in disguise, wearing a broad-brimmed hat pulled low to hide his missing eye, and a long cloak that earned him names like Grimnir, the Masked One, and Gangleri, the Wanderer. He was a god of warriors who often used cunning and deception rather than straightforward combat. He was called the father of the slain, yet he would often betray the heroes who served him, granting them victory in battle after battle only to arrange their deaths when he needed them in Valhalla. He was, in short, a god who would sacrifice anything and anyone, including himself, in pursuit of wisdom. And that brings us to the first of his great sacrifices, the moment when he gave up part of himself for knowledge that would define him forever. It brings us to Mimir's well. Deep beneath one of Yggdrasil's 3 great roots, in the realm of the frost giants, there flowed a spring of water unlike any other in the 9 worlds. This was Mimir's well, also called Mimisbrunna, and its waters held something far more precious than gold or gems, or even immortality. They held wisdom, pure and distilled, knowledge of the cosmos past and future, understanding that transcended the boundaries of time and space. The well was guarded by a being named Mimir, and here the myths grow strange and contradictory, as they often do with the oldest stories. Was Mimir a god, a giant, some ancient entity that predated both? The sources don't entirely agree, but they do tell us this. Mimir was wise, possibly the wisest being in all of creation, and he drank from the well every morning using a horn called Gjallarhorn, which some say was the same horn that Heimdall would one day blow to signal the beginning of Ragnarok. Some scholars believe Mimir might have been Odin's uncle, the brother of his mother Bestla, which would make him a giant by birth, but tied to the gods by blood. This would fit the pattern we see throughout Norse mythology, where the line between god and giant is never quite as clear as we might like, where families intermarry and old grudges run alongside older kinships. Odin had heard of this well, of course. When you're a god who seeks knowledge above all else, you hear about every source of wisdom in the cosmos, no matter how distant or how guarded. He knew that Mimir drank from it, and that Mimir's wisdom was unmatched. He knew that the well sat at the root of Yggdrasil, the same tree that would later become the site of another sacrifice, and he knew that he had to drink from it, no matter the cost. So Odin traveled to Jotunheim, to the place where the great root of Yggdrasil plunged into the earth. He found the well, its waters dark and still, reflecting not the sky above, but something deeper, something that seemed to look back at whoever gazed into it. And there, standing beside it, was Mimir, ancient and knowing, a figure who had stood in that spot since before Odin was born, watching the ages turn. Odin approached with the confidence of a king, but also with the humility of a seeker. He was both god and supplicant here, both the Allfather of Asgard, and just another being thirsting for knowledge he didn't possess. He looked at Mimir and made his request directly, without preamble or flattery. He wanted to drink from the well. Mimir looked at him with eyes that had seen the birth of the cosmos, that had watched Ymir die and the world be born from his corpse. He knew who stood before him. He knew what Odin sought and why, and he knew the price that such knowledge demanded. "You can drink," Mimir said, but not without payment. Wisdom has a cost, and the cost is always high. Odin nodded. He had expected this. "Name your price," he said, "and I will pay it." The guardian of the well was silent for a moment, studying the god before him. This proud king, with his two eyes still intact, his vision whole and unclouded. Then Mimir spoke the price that would echo through mythology forever. "An eye, your eye. Pluck it from your skull and give it to the well, so that all who look into these waters will see the sacrifice you made for wisdom." A lesser god might have hesitated. A lesser god might have tried to bargain, to offer something else, gold or power or promises. But Odin was not a lesser god, and he understood something fundamental about wisdom. It cannot be bought cheaply. True understanding demands true sacrifice. You don't get to keep all of yourself and become more than you are. You have to give up something precious, something you can never reclaim, something that will mark you forever. Odin reached up to his face. The myths don't tell us which eye it was, the right or the left, and artistic depictions vary, though many show the left eye missing. It doesn't really matter. What matters is what happened next. Without hesitation, without words or ceremony or second thoughts, Odin plunged his fingers into his own eye socket. Pain must have blazed through him, white and blinding, the kind of agony that would make a mortal scream and a lesser god weep. But Odin was silent. He dug his fingers deeper, gripped the eye, and pulled. The myths are mercifully brief in their description. The eye came free. Blood ran down Odin's face, hot and red and divine, and he held his own eye in his palm, staring at it with the other eye that remained, seeing himself from both perspectives now, from within and without, the seer and the seen. Then he dropped it into the well. The water rippled where the eye fell, circles spreading outward, and then the eye sank, descending into those dark depths to rest there forever, a permanent witness to Odin's sacrifice. Some versions of the myth say that to this day, anyone who looks into Mimir's well can see Odin's eye staring back at them from the bottom, a reminder that wisdom requires sacrifice, that knowledge is never free. Mimir took up his horn, Gjallarhorn, and dipped it deep into the well. He drew it up full of water, that precious water that held the memories of the cosmos, the secrets of the past, and the whispers of the future. And he handed it to Odin, the now one-eyed god, whose face was a mask of blood and pain and anticipation. Odin drank. What did he learn in that moment? What visions flooded his mind as the waters of wisdom flowed down his throat? The myths don't tell us everything, but we can piece together fragments. He learned of the runes, those mystical symbols that held the power to shape reality itself, though he didn't yet know how to access them. He learned more about Ragnarok, seeing in terrible clarity the shape of the end to come, the burning of the world, the death of the gods, his own demise in the jaws of the wolf Fenrir. He learned the pathways between worlds, the hidden roads and secret names, the way the cosmos fit together like a puzzle of impossible complexity. He learned that his sacrifice, as great as it was only the beginning. There was more knowledge to be gained, and it would require more sacrifice. The runes called to him from the depths of Yggdrasil, and obtaining them would demand something even more terrible than an eye. But first, let's understand what Odin gained from this moment. He had traded his normal, everyday vision for something deeper. The scholar who studies this myth point out that Odin sacrificed his ability to see the surface of things for the ability to see beneath them. He gave up breadth of vision for depth of vision. Where before he saw the world as it appeared, now he saw the world as it truly was, stripped of illusion, naked in its fundamental nature. He became the one-eyed god, a figure of depth and wisdom and hidden knowledge. His empty eye socket became his mark, the visible sign of his sacrifice, a reminder to all who saw him that he had paid a price they could barely imagine for insights they could never fully understand. Some stories say he wore an eye patch. Others say he left the socket empty, a dark hole in his face that unnerved those who met his gaze. Still others say he somehow concealed it with glamour or shadow, so that casual observers might not notice, though those with the sight to see would know immediately what he had done. The blood eventually stopped flowing. The wound healed after a fashion as much as such a wound can heal in a god. But Odin was changed, marked forever by his choice, bearing the permanent scar of his hunger for wisdom. He turned away from Mimir's well with his vision halved and his understanding vastly expanded. The waters of wisdom coursed through him, illuminating his mind, showing him patterns and connections he had never perceived before. But they also showed him something else. They showed him that he still didn't know enough. The runes remained hidden. The full depth of Sidar magic remained unexplored. There were mysteries yet to unravel, secrets yet to learn. And so, with his single eye gazing ahead with new clarity, Odin set off toward his next great sacrifice. He returned to Yggdrasil, not to the root where Mimir's well flowed, but to the tree's great trunk, to a branch that hung out over the void, over the depths where the runes dwelt in their hidden realm. He had given an eye. Now he would give so much more. The hanging from Yggdrasil. There's a poem in the Poetic Edda called the Havamal, the sayings of the High One, which is essentially Odin speaking about his own life and the wisdom he's gained. In it, he describes an ordeal so terrible, so extreme, that it became one of the central images of Norse mythology, depicted on runestones and artifacts throughout the Viking world. He hung himself from Yggdrasil for 9 days and 9 nights. Let that sink in for a moment. Odin, the king of the gods, the Allfather, deliberately subjected himself to a form of execution, to a slow death by hanging alone and unaided for 9 full days. And he did it willingly, eagerly even, because at the end of that suffering, he knew he would gain something invaluable. The runes. The runes were more than just letters or symbols for writing. In the Norse conception, they were fundamental forces of the cosmos, each one embodying a specific power or principle. They were carved into reality itself by the Norns, those 3 mysterious women who sat at the well of Urd and wove the fate of all beings. The runes were tools of magic, keys to understanding, weapons that could be wielded by those who truly comprehended their nature. But the runes did not reveal themselves easily. They dwelt in the depths, in the well of Urd, beneath Yggdrasil's first root, and they would only show themselves to someone who proved worthy through extreme sacrifice. Odin had drunk from Mimir's well and gained wisdom, but the runes required something more. They required death itself, or as close to death as a god could come. So Odin prepared himself for the ordeal. He took Gungnir, his spear that never missed, and he climbed Yggdrasil until he found a branch that suited his purpose, one that hung out over the void, over the spaces between worlds where the cosmic winds howled, and nothing existed except potential and emptiness. And then, alone, with no one to witness or aid him, Odin did something that seems almost incomprehensible. He took his spear and drove it into his own side, piercing his divine flesh, causing his own blood to flow. Then he fashioned a noose from whatever material the myths don't specify. Maybe a rope, maybe a vine from the tree itself, and he placed it around his neck. And he hung himself from that branch, wounded and bleeding, dangling over the abyss, swaying in the cosmic wind. The Havamal describes it in Odin's own words. "I know that I hung on a windy tree 9 long nights, wounded with a spear, dedicated to Odin, myself to myself, on that tree of which no man knows from where its roots run. No bread did they give me, nor a drink from a horn. Downwards I peered. I took up the runes, screaming, I took them. Then I fell back from there." Think about what that means. Odin sacrificed himself to himself. This wasn't a gift to another god or a payment to some cosmic force. This was Odin offering Odin the ultimate expression of his willingness to give up everything for knowledge. In Germanic culture, hanging was specifically associated with Odin. Executed criminals were often hanged as sacrifices to him. The gallows itself was sometimes called Odin's tree. By hanging from Yggdrasil, Odin was performing the ultimate Odinic sacrifice, becoming both the god who demands the offering and the victim who provides it. For 9 days and 9 nights, he hung there. 9 was a sacred number in Norse cosmology. There were 9 worlds. The gods would die at Ragnarok after 9 days of battle. Odin learned 9 magic songs, and now he would hang for 9 complete cycles of the sun, if the sun's light even reached that far up in the branches of Yggdrasil. No one brought him food or water. He had explicitly forbidden it, commanded the other gods to leave him be, no matter how much he might seem to be suffering. This was his ordeal alone to endure. He couldn't even help himself, couldn't ease his position or rest or take any comfort. He just hung there, wounded and bleeding, the noose tight around his neck, the spear wound in his side, weeping divine blood that dripped down into the void below. The pain must have been excruciating. The thirst must have been maddening. The hunger would have gnawed at him, though gods perhaps don't experience hunger the same way mortals do. But worse than any physical suffering was the spiritual dimension of his ordeal. He was dying without dying, approaching the threshold between life and death, straddling that liminal space where the normal rules don't apply and hidden things become visible. He stared down into the darkness below, into the well of Urd, which sat at the base of Yggdrasil's root, far, far below. And he called to the runes. He didn't just ask for them, he demanded them. He had earned them with his suffering. He had paid the price with his blood and pain and days of torment. He had given himself to himself, the perfect sacrifice, and now he expected payment. For 8 days, nothing, just pain and darkness and the howling of cosmic winds. His vision, already halved, grew dim. His strength faded. He approached death, teetering on that knife's edge, becoming a shade of himself, almost a ghost, almost a corpse hanging from a tree in an ancient execution. And then, on the 9th night, he saw them. They appeared in the depths below, shapes in the darkness, forms rising from the well of Urd like creatures from an abyss. The runes themselves, those fundamental forces, those cosmic symbols, revealed themselves to him because he had proven worthy, because he had suffered enough, because he had died enough to see what the living cannot normally perceive. He learned their shapes first, 24 of them in the Elder Futhark, each one a specific geometric form. But more than that, he learned their meanings, their powers, their secrets. He learned Fehu, wealth and cattle, and the flow of resources, Uruz, strength and primal power, Thorisas, the destructive forces of giants and thorns, Ansus, communication and divine inspiration, Raido, journeys and the right order of things. Each rune revealed itself, and with each revelation came understanding, not just intellectual knowledge, but deep, visceral comprehension of how the cosmos worked, how fate was woven, how reality could be shaped and altered by those who knew the right symbols and the right words of power. When he had absorbed all 24 runes, when the knowledge had burned itself into his mind and soul, Odin screamed. The myths specifically mention this. He didn't whisper or speak or announce his discovery. He screamed, a primal sound of triumph and agony and transformation, a cry that echoed across all 9 worlds, a declaration that he had succeeded, that he had endured, that he had taken the runes for his own. And then he fell back from the tree. Whether this means he cut himself down or simply released his grip, the myths don't specify. But he fell, possibly tumbling through space, possibly catching himself, until he stood once more on solid ground, no longer hanging, no longer dying, but reborn through his ordeal into a new existence. He was still missing an eye. He was still wounded from the spear, but now he carried within him knowledge that would make him the most powerful sorcerer in all the 9 worlds. With the runes, he could heal wounds or inflict them. He could bind his enemies or free his allies. He could blunt weapons or sharpen them. He could calm storms or call them forth. He could speak with the dead and compel them to answer. He could protect warriors in battle or ensure their doom. He could learn secrets from the wind and hide truths in shadows. He had become something more than a god. He had become a shaman, a sorcerer, a master of the hidden arts. And this, more than his kingship of Asgard, more than his throne, or his spear, or his warriors, was what defined Odin. He was the god who would pay any price for wisdom, who would mutilate himself and nearly die over and over again in pursuit of understanding. The one-eyed wanderer who hung from the world tree and screamed the runes into existence. But having the runes was one thing, using them was another. And Odin would spend the rest of his existence exploring their depths, learning new applications, discovering new combinations, pushing the boundaries of what was possible with these fundamental tools of creation. He learned 18 magic songs, he tells us in the Havamal, and these became some of his most closely guarded secrets. He could heal the sick, defeat his enemies in court, calm the angry, wake the dead, win the love of women, deflect curses, survive drowning, extinguish fires, end quarrels, protect his warriors, silence his enemies, and more. Each song was a specific application of runic power, a formula worked out through trial and error, through experimentation and insight. But even this wasn't enough. Even with the runes and the wisdom from Mimir's well, Odin continued to seek knowledge. He wandered the 9 worlds in disguise, testing people, learning from them, gathering information. He visited giants and dwarves and elves and humans. He sat at the tables of kings and the fires of wanderers. He raised the dead from their graves and questioned them about what they had seen beyond the veil of death. He learned Seder, a form of magic particularly associated with women, which involved going into trances and sending one's spirit out to see distant events, to shape fate, to work magic through will and vision rather than through force. This brought him scorn from other gods, particularly the more straightforwardly masculine ones like Thor, because Sida was considered unmanly, ergi, associated with women and with a kind of passive receptivity that didn't fit the warrior ideal. But Odin didn't care about scorn. He never had. He cared about power and knowledge, and if that meant practicing women's magic, then so be it. He would do whatever it took to learn whatever could be learned. This brings us to another strange and important story, another sacrifice, another head, and a source of counsel that would serve Odin throughout his existence: Mimir's head. During the war between the Aesir, Odin's tribe of gods, and the Vanir, another tribe of deities associated with fertility and prosperity, there came a time when both sides sought peace. To seal this peace, they exchanged hostages, important members of each tribe who would live among the other as a sign of good faith. The Vanir sent to Asgard two of their greatest gods, Njord, wealthy and powerful, lord of ships and the sea, and his son Freyr, radiant and generous, a god of fertility and kingship. These were valuable hostages, proof that the Vanir wanted the peace to hold. The Aesir in return sent several of their own, including a large, handsome god named Hoenir, and significantly Mimir. Yes, the same Mimir who had guarded the well where Odin sacrificed his eye. The myths are unclear about how Mimir went from being a giant or ancient being guarding a well in Jotunheim to being someone the Aesir could send as a hostage. But such contradictions are common in these old stories. Perhaps there were two Mimirs. Perhaps he had joined the Aesir after Odin's sacrifice. Perhaps the chronology is more complex than we understand. What matters is what happened next. The Vanir were impressed with Hoenir. He was large and strong and carried himself with authority. They made him a chieftain, giving him an important position in their councils and their deliberations. But they soon noticed something strange. Whenever Hoenir had to make a decision, whenever he was asked for his judgment on some important matter, he would always look to Mimir first. And Mimir would whisper advice in his ear. Then Hoenir would speak, offering wise counsel, making sound decisions. But if Mimir wasn't there, if Hoenir was alone at a meeting or a gathering, he would defer every decision. Let others decide, he would say, over and over again, revealing that without Mimir's guidance, he was essentially useless. The Vanir felt cheated. They had sent the Aesir two of their best gods, and in return, they had gotten one god who was only wise when prompted by another. They began to suspect that the Aesir had tricked them, that the real value was in Mimir, not Hoenir, and that they had been given the appearance of a great chieftain without the substance. In their anger, they seized Mimir, and in an act of brutal retribution, they beheaded him. They sent his head back to Asgard, to Odin, as a message about what happened when the Vanir felt deceived. Odin received Mimir's severed head, and for anyone else, this would have been the end of the story. A tragic loss, a casualty of war and misunderstanding. But Odin was not anyone else. He looked at Mimir's head, at those eyes that had seen the dawn of creation, at that mouth that had drunk from the well of wisdom every day for ages uncounted, and he saw potential. He took the head and preserved it. using herbs and runes, using his knowledge of magic and his understanding of the boundaries between life and death. Odin worked an enchantment over Mimir's severed head. He spoke charms over it, powerful spells that would prevent decay, that would maintain the consciousness within, that would allow the head to continue to think and perceive, and most importantly, to speak. And it worked. Mimir's head lived on after a fashion, conscious and aware, able to talk and counsel and share wisdom. Odin kept it with him, carrying it or keeping it close, and he would consult with it regularly. He would ask Mimir questions about the past and the future, about the secrets of the cosmos, about the plans he should make and the paths he should take. Mimir, who had drunk from the well of wisdom every day before his death, who had guarded that well since before the worlds were made, who possessed knowledge that even Odin didn't have, despite his own drink from those waters and his mastery of the runes, became Odin's most trusted advisor, a severed head preserved by magic, a grotesque counselor, a reminder that even death could be overcome by those who knew the right spells and weren't afraid to work dark magic to achieve their ends. This relationship continued for the rest of Odin's existence. In some of the poems, Odin is described as speaking with Mimir's head, drawing on its wisdom for crucial decisions. In the prophecy of Ragnarok, it's said that when the final battle begins, when the worlds start to shake and the forces of chaos gather, Odin will ride to Mimir's well one last time and consult with Mimir's head, seeking guidance for the battle he knows he cannot win. It's a strange image, isn't it? The king of the gods carrying around a preserved severed head, talking to it, treating it as his most valuable counselor. But it fits perfectly with Odin's character. He would do anything for wisdom. He would preserve the dead, traffic with corpses, use magic that other gods found disturbing, all in service of his endless quest to know more, to understand deeper, to see further ahead. The wanderer, with his eyes sacrificed, his body scarred from hanging, his knowledge vast from the runes and the wells of wisdom, Odin might have been content to sit on his throne in Asgard and rule as a king should, from a position of stability and power. But that was never who he was. Instead, he became the wanderer. Odin rarely stayed in Asgard for long. He was constantly traveling, moving between the 9 worlds, walking the roads and paths that mortals walked, but always in disguise. He would appear as an old man, often going by names like Grimnir, the Masked One, or Gangleri, the Wanderer, or Harbard, the Grey Beard. He wore a broad-brimmed hat pulled low to shadow his face, particularly his missing eye, and a long cloak of grey or blue that billowed behind him as he walked. He carried a walking staff, sometimes identified with his spear Gungnir, though in his disguised form it appeared as nothing more than the stick an old traveller might use. But those who looked closely, those who had the sight to see, would notice strange things about this wandering old man. His single eye, when he allowed it to be seen, burned with an intensity that normal humans didn't possess. His knowledge seemed too deep for a mere traveller. His questions cut too precisely to the heart of matters. Why did he wander? There are several reasons, some practical, some more existential. On a practical level, Odin was gathering information. He would visit the halls of kings and the homes of commoners, listening to their conversations, learning about their lives, testing their hospitality and their wisdom. The Norse people took hospitality very seriously. A stranger arriving at your door was to be fed and sheltered, no questions asked until after they had eaten and rested. This custom allowed Odin to move freely, to sit at tables across the 9 worlds and listen and learn. He would often challenge people to contests of wisdom, asking riddles or posing difficult questions to see how they would respond. Sometimes he was looking for truly wise individuals, people who might have insights he lacked. Other times, he was testing, seeing if a king was worthy of his throne or a farmer worthy of his land. And sometimes, one suspects, he was simply amusing himself, enjoying the game of traveling incognito, of being treated as a common wanderer by people who didn't realize they were speaking to the king of the gods. But on a deeper level, Odin wandered, because that's who he was. He was restless, never content, always seeking, always moving. The throne of Asgard might give him authority, but the road gave him knowledge. The high seat Hlidskjalf might let him see all 9 worlds, but walking through them let him understand them in a way that no amount of observation from a distance could provide. He learned the languages of birds and beasts. He discovered the hidden paths between worlds, the shortcuts and byways that most didn't know existed. He spoke with dwarves in their underground forges and learned the secrets of craftsmanship. He visited the giants in Jotunheim, sometimes in disguise, sometimes openly, engaging in battles of wits and exchanges of knowledge, even with beings who were technically his enemies. One of the most famous stories of Odin's wandering involves a giant named Vafthrûdnir, renowned for his wisdom and knowledge of ancient lore. Odin, disguised once again, traveled to Vafthrûdnir's hall and challenged him to a contest of questions. They would take turns asking each other increasingly difficult questions about cosmology, about the gods, about the past and the future. The loser would forfeit his life. It was a dangerous game, but Odin had never shied away from danger, not when knowledge was the prize. They sat across from each other, the disguised god and the ancient giant, and began their duel of wisdom. Vafthrûdnir asked about the origins of the worlds, about the names of gods and giants, about the nature of day and night. Odin answered correctly every time, drawing on his vast knowledge, his drink from Mimir's well, his understanding of the runes. When it was Odin's turn, he asked progressively harder questions, digging into lore so ancient and obscure that even Vafthrûdnir struggled to answer. Finally, Odin asked a question that seemed simple, but was in fact impossible for anyone but himself to answer. What did Odin whisper into his son Baldur's ear before Baldur was placed on his funeral pyre? This was a question about the future, about something that hadn't happened yet in the timeline of the story, and it was also intensely personal, known only to Odin himself. Vafthrûdnir looked at his questioner with dawning realization and understanding. Only Odin would know the answer to that question. Only Odin would ask it. The giant smiled grimly and acknowledged defeat, recognizing the god before him and accepting that he had been outsmarted. But Odin didn't kill Vafthrûdnir. In many of these stories, when Odin wins his contests of wisdom, he's generous in victory, sparing the lives of those who prove themselves worthy opponents. What he wanted wasn't death. It was the challenge, the testing of his own knowledge against another's, the assurance that his vast understanding was still adequate, that he hadn't missed something crucial, because that was Odin's great fear. Not that he would die, he knew he would die at Ragnarok, but that he would die ignorant, that there was some piece of knowledge, some crucial understanding that he had missed, and that missing it would lead to catastrophe. Of all Odin's creations, of all his accomplishments and sacrifices, perhaps none is more famous than Valhalla, the Hall of the Slain, where warriors who died bravely in battle would feast and fight for all eternity, or at least until the coming of Ragnarok. The name Valhalla translates roughly to Hall of those chosen for slaughter or Hall of the Fallen, though neither translation quite captures the significance of what it represented in Norse culture. It wasn't simply heaven or an afterlife reward. It was a very specific place for a very specific type of person, and it existed for a very specific purpose. Valhalla stood in Asgard, in the realm of Gladsheim, and it was vast beyond imagination. The roof was thatched with golden shields that gleamed in the light. The rafters were made from spear shafts. Armor and weapons adorned the walls. It had 540 doors, each one wide enough for 800 warriors to march through shoulder to shoulder. Some sources say there were even more doors, that the exact number didn't matter, because Valhalla could accommodate however many warriors it needed to hold. Above the western door hung a wolf, and above that circled an eagle, both sacred to Odin, both symbols of the battle and death that had brought the warriors to this hall. Inside, the benches were strewn with chainmail and coats of war. This was not a peaceful place. It was a warrior's paradise, a hall designed to honor those who lived and died by the sword. But who went to Valhalla? Not everyone who died, certainly. Not even everyone who died in battle. The Norse believed in multiple afterlives, different destinations for different types of death. Those who died of old age or sickness went to hell, the realm of the dead, which was neither punishment nor reward, but simply the place where most souls ended up. Those who drowned at sea went to the Hall of Ran, the sea goddess, and some, those who died in battle, were claimed by the goddess Freya for her hall Folkvanga, which was said to be beautiful and peaceful. But the ones Odin wanted, the ones he chose for Valhalla, were selected with great care by his Valkyries. The Valkyries, whose name means choosers of the slain, were divine maidens who served Odin as his agents in battle. They rode through the skies on magnificent horses, or sometimes on wolves, wearing armor and carrying spears, flying over battlefields and selecting which warriors would live and which would die. More importantly, they decided which of the dead would come to Valhalla and which would go elsewhere. This gave the Valkyries immense power. They were deciding fates, determining who would have the honor of feasting with Odin and who would languish in less glorious realms. Some of the most famous Valkyries had names that reflected their nature. Brynhild, meaning bright battle. Sigrun, victory rune. Hilda, simply battle. Gunna, war. Gondul, wand-bearer. Skuld, who shared a name with one of the Norns, representing the future and what is becoming. They were not gentle shepherds of the dead. They were warriors themselves, fierce and powerful, capable of fighting if needed, though their primary role was to choose, not to battle. After a fight had ended and the blood had soaked into the earth, the Valkyries would descend and walk among the fallen, selecting the bravest, the strongest, the most skilled. These warriors, called the Einherjar, would be lifted onto the backs of the Valkyries' horses and carried away to Asgard, to Valhalla, to a new existence beyond death. The word Einherjar means something like those who fight alone or army of one, emphasizing that each warrior in Valhalla was exceptional, a hero in their own right, not just anonymous soldiers, but individually remarkable fighters who had proven themselves through their death in battle. When the Einherjar arrived at Valhalla, they didn't rest. Rest was for the weak, for those who died in bed. Instead, they found a hall full of warriors like themselves, and they did what warriors do. They fought. Every morning, the Einherjar would arm themselves and go out to the courtyard or the fields surrounding Valhalla, and they would battle each other. They would hack and slash, dismember and disembowel, kill and be killed in glorious combat that was both practice and entertainment. It wasn't personal. These were training battles, preparation for the final war that everyone knew was coming. The warriors would fight with the same intensity they had shown in life, the same skill, the same ferocity. And then, every evening, something miraculous would happen. All the wounds would heal. All the dead would rise again, whole and unhurt. The warriors who had been cleaved in half or run through with spears would stand up, shake themselves off, and return to the hall for the evening feast, as if nothing had happened. This was the magic of Valhalla. Death was temporary here. Only the final death at Ragnarok would be permanent. The feasts themselves were legendary. Every night, the Einherjar would gather in the great hall, sitting on those benches strewn with armor, and they would eat meat carved from a magical boar named Ymir. This boar was slaughtered every day by a cook named Andhrimnir, who prepared it in a massive cauldron called Eldrimnir. No matter how many warriors there were, and their numbers grew every day as more fallen heroes arrived, there was always enough meat. Everyone could eat their fill, gorging themselves on roasted pork that never ran out. And when they were thirsty, the Valkyries would serve them mead, bringing drinking horns filled with golden liquid that flowed from the udders of a goat named Hydron. This goat stood on the roof of Valhalla, eating the leaves of a tree called Laeradr, which some scholars think might be another name for Yggdrasil itself, or perhaps a branch of the world tree. The mead was endless, like the meat, always flowing, always perfect, never running dry, no matter how much the warriors drank. Odin himself would sit at the high table, watching his warriors feast and fight, but he rarely ate. Some sources say he never ate at all, surviving on wine alone. Instead, he would feed his portions of meat to his two wolves, Geri and Freki, both names meaning greedy, who lay at his feet and accepted his offerings. His ravens, Hugin and Munin, would perch on his shoulders, whispering into his ears the news they had gathered during their daily flights across all 9 worlds. This was Odin's army, the Einherjar. This was his preparation for the war he knew was coming. Every day, more warriors arrived, brought by the Valkyries, swelling the ranks, increasing his forces. By the time Ragnarok came, Valhalla would hold countless thousands of the finest fighters who had ever lived, all of them loyal to Odin, all of them ready to stand with him in the final battle. But there was a strange sadness to Valhalla, if you looked closely enough. These warriors were being gathered not to save the world, but to delay its ending, if only by moments. Odin knew, had always known, that Ragnarok was inevitable, that the gods would fall, that even Valhalla's vast army of heroes would not be enough to prevent the destruction that was prophesied. And yet he kept gathering them, kept building his forces, kept preparing for a battle he knew he would lose. Why? Perhaps out of defiance, perhaps out of hope that if he gathered enough warriors, learned enough magic, sacrificed enough of himself, he might somehow change fate. Or perhaps simply because a god who has spent his entire existence seeking knowledge and fighting against ignorance cannot simply surrender, cannot simply accept the end without resistance. The warriors didn't know or didn't care. To them, Valhalla was paradise, a place where they could fight and feast forever, with the greatest king of gods watching over them. They had died with honor in battle, and now they would live with honor in Odin's hall. And when the time came, they would die with honor once more in the greatest battle ever fought. But that time was approaching, drawing closer with every passing age, with every new prophecy, with every sign and portent. The shadow of Ragnarok grew longer, and even in the golden light of Valhalla, even in the midst of endless feasting and battle, that shadow could not be entirely ignored. The shadow of Ragnarok, the prophecy of Ragnarok, hung over the Norse cosmos like a sword suspended by a thread, inevitable and terrible, known to the gods and feared by them, yet impossible to prevent. Odin knew it better than anyone. He had sought out prophecies, had raised the dead to question them, had consulted with seers and Völvas, shamanic women who could see into the future, and they had all told him the same story, with variations in detail but with terrible consistency in the outcome. The world would end, the gods would die, Odin himself would fall. The prophecy said that Ragnarok would be preceded by signs, warnings of the coming catastrophe. There would be a terrible winter called Fimbul Winter, the Great Winter, which would last for 3 years without a summer in between. Snow would fall from all directions. Frost would bite deep into the earth. The sun and moon would be devoured by the wolves that had chased them since the beginning of time. Stars would disappear from the sky. Brothers would fight brothers. Fathers would kill sons. All bonds of kinship and honor would dissolve in an orgy of violence and chaos. This was called the Axe Age, the Sword Age, the Wind Age, the Wolf Age, a time when shields would be cloven and the world would spin toward its ending. The earth itself would shake with earthquakes so powerful that mountains would crumble and every bond would be broken. This was crucial because several of the greatest threats to the gods were being held by bonds, by chains and fetters that had been carefully forged to restrain them. The most dangerous was Fenrir, a monstrous wolf, one of the children of Loki, the trickster god. Fenrir had been bound by the gods with a magical chain called Gleipnir, made by dwarves from impossible things: the sound of a cat's footfall, the beard of a woman, the roots of a mountain, the sinews of a bear, the breath of a fish, and the spittle of a bird. This chain was thin as silk and yet unbreakable, at least under normal circumstances. The gods had tricked Fenrir into letting them bind him, and it had cost the god Tyr his hand when Fenrir realized the deception and bit it off in revenge. But when the earthquakes came during Ragnarok, Gleipnir would snap. Fenrir would be free. Loki himself was bound as well, chained to rocks deep in a cave as punishment for his role in the death of Balder, Odin's beloved son. Venom from a serpent dripped onto Loki's face, causing him excruciating pain, though his wife Sigyn stood beside him with a bowl, catching most of the drops. When she had to turn away to empty the bowl, the venom would strike Loki's face, and his convulsions would cause earthquakes. But when Ragnarok came, when the great earthquakes shook everything, Loki's bonds would also break, and he would be free to join his monstrous children in the assault on the gods. The world serpent Jormungandr, another of Loki's children, would rise from the ocean where Odin had cast it at the beginning of time. The serpent had grown so large that it encircled the entire world, holding its own tail in its mouth. When it released its tail and began to move toward shore, the seas would churn and flood, drowning the land, adding to the chaos and destruction. From Muspelheim, the fire realm, would come the fire giant Surtur, who had stood there with his flaming sword since before the worlds were made. He would lead an army of fire giants across the rainbow bridge Bifrost, and the bridge would shatter under their weight and heat, cutting off one of the main routes between the realms. The dead would rise as well. A ship called Naglfar, built from the fingernails and toenails of dead men, would break free from its moorings in Hell. Loki would captain it, and it would be filled with the dishonored dead, those who had lived and died without glory, now given a chance to fight in the final battle. All these forces would converge on a great battlefield called Vigrid, a plain stretching 120 leagues in every direction. And there, the gods would meet them for the last battle. Odin knew all of this. He had seen it in prophecy. He had drunk from wells of wisdom. He had consulted Mimir's head. And yet, knowing did not mean accepting. So he prepared. He gathered his Einherjar. He forged alliances. He planned strategies. He learned every spell and charm that might give him an advantage. He sacrificed and sought and schemed, all in the hope that perhaps, somehow, fate might be altered, might be delayed, might be defeated. But fate in Norse mythology was not something that could be changed, not even by the gods. The Norns who sat at the well of Urd and wove the threads of destiny were bound by their own weaving. What they had decreed would come to pass, and they had decreed Ragnarok. The gods knew this. They lived in the shadow of their own prophesied deaths. Thor knew he would kill Jormungandr, but would die from the serpent's venom. Tyr knew he would die fighting Garm, the hound of hell. Freyr knew he would fall to Surtur's fire sword because he had given away his own sword long ago for love. Heimdall would kill and be killed by Loki. And Odin, the Allfather, the one-eyed wanderer, the god who had sacrificed so much for wisdom, would be swallowed whole by Fenrir. The wolf he had helped to bind, the monster whose freedom he had delayed but could not prevent. This knowledge colored everything he did, every choice, every sacrifice, every wandering journey, and every consultation with the dead was driven by the knowledge that the end was coming, and that he would die in Aiti. Some might have given in to despair, others might have sought escape or denial. But Odin did what he always did. He kept seeking, he kept learning, he kept hoping that wisdom might be the key to survival, even when all the wisdom he had already gained told him it was hopeless. In the meantime, life in Asgard continued. The gods had their quarrels and their feasts, their loves and their betrayals. Stories were told and retold. Heroes rose and fell in Midgard, the world of humans, and the worthy were brought to Valhalla. The cosmos turned, the tree groaned, and slowly, inexorably, the signs began to appear. The final battle, when Ragnarok finally came, It came with all the terrible glory that had been prophesied. The great winter had passed, 3 years of frost and snow and suffering. Kinslaying had spread across the land. The bonds of civilization had frayed and snapped. And then the earth began to shake. In his cave, Loki felt his chains shatter. He stood for the first time in ages, free, his face scarred from the venom, his heart filled with rage at the gods who had bound him. He went to the shore where Naglfar waited, that dreadful ship of dead men's nails, and he took command of it, filling it with the dishonored dead who had never earned a place in Valhalla or Folkvanga. Fenrir broke free from Gleipnir with a roar that echoed across all 9 worlds. His jaws opened wide, so wide that his upper jaw touched the sky and his lower jaw scraped the earth. Fire blazed from his eyes and nostrils. He shook himself and began to run toward Vigrid, toward his destiny, toward the god who had helped bind him. Jormungandr released its tail and began to thrash, causing waves so massive they flooded coastlines and drowned cities. The serpent crawled onto shore, its venom spraying in all directions, poisoning the air itself. It too moved toward Vigrid, driven by ancient hatred of the gods who had cast it into the sea. From the south, Surtur came with his army of fire giants, their heat so intense it began to melt mountains and boil rivers. He crossed the ruins of Bifrost and marched toward the plain where the final battle would take place. In Asgard, Heimdall stood at his post and saw them coming, the watchman of the gods, whose sight was so keen he could see for 100 leagues, and whose hearing was so sharp he could hear grass growing and wool lengthening on sheep's backs, witness the gathering of all the forces of chaos and destruction. He took up Gjallarhorn, the great horn that had once been used to drink from Mimir's well, and he blew it with all his strength. The sound rang out across the 9 worlds, a blast that could not be ignored, that penetrated every hall and every heart. It was the signal. Ragnarok had begun. Odin rose from his high seat. He had been expecting this call for his entire existence, and yet now that it had come, he felt the weight of it settle on him like a physical burden. He put on his golden helmet and his finest armor. He took up Gungnir, the spear that never missed. He looked around at Asgard, at the halls he had built and the throne he had sat upon, knowing he would not see them again. He called the Einherjar. From Valhalla they poured hundreds of thousands of warriors, the finest fighters from every age, every land, every battle. They had trained for this moment every day since their arrival. They had fought and died and risen again countless times in preparation. Now the real battle had come, and there would be no resurrection after this one. The Valkyries rode with them, armed and armored, no longer just choosers of the slain, but warriors in their own right, ready to fight beside the Einherjar and the gods they served. Odin rode at their head on Sleipnir, his 8-legged horse faster than any steed in all the worlds. Thor was beside him with his hammer Mjolnir crackling with lightning. Tyr rode with his single hand gripping his sword, ready to face Garm the Hound. Freya was there, though he faced Surtur without his own sword, armed with an antler, destined to fall but determined to fight anyway. All the gods who could bear arms came, leaving only those too young or too weak to fight. They rode to Vigrid, and there they found their enemies waiting. Fenrir, massive and terrible, his mouth open to swallow the sky. Jormungandr coiled in poisonous loops, his venom already corrupting the air. Surtur with his flaming sword, bright as the sun, ready to burn the world. Loki at the prow of Naglfar, leading the dishonored dead. Giants from Jotunheim, frost and fire alike, come to witness the fall of the gods who had killed their progenitor Ymir so long ago. The armies charged. Einherjar crashed into giants and dead men, weapons clashing, screams of rage and pain filling the air. The earth beneath them cracked from the weight and fury of the battle. The sky itself seemed to darken, though whether from the death of the sun or from the smoke of burning things, no one could say. Odin rode straight toward Fenrir, the wolf that was prophesied to kill him. He had known this moment was coming since long before the wolf was born. He had tried to prevent it, had helped bind Fenrir, had gathered armies to fight against this exact fate. And yet here it was, unavoidable, inevitable, written into the fabric of reality itself. The Einherjar fought bravely around him, trying to help, trying to give their Allfather a chance. But Fenrir was beyond mortal, or even immortal resistance. The wolf was a force of nature, of chaos unleashed, and it had waited ages for this moment, to revenge itself upon the god who had imprisoned it. Odin thrust with Gungnir, his spear piercing Fenrir's hide. The wolf bled, but it did not fall. It did not even slow. It lunged forward, jaws gaping, and those jaws closed around Odin, the All-Father, the Wanderer, the god who had given an eye for wisdom and hung from the world tree and spoken with the dead and learned the runes and gathered armies and prepared for this moment with every resource at his disposal, was swallowed whole by Fenrir. Just like that, one of the most powerful gods in Norse mythology, consumed in an instant, disappearing into the wolf's maw, his spear falling from his hand, his single eye seeing darkness for the last time. But his death was not without revenge. Vidar, Odin's son, witnessed his father's death and roared with grief and rage. Vidar was one of the strongest of all the gods, known as the Silent God, because he rarely spoke. He wore a special shoe, crafted from all the scraps of leather that shoemakers had discarded throughout history, a boot so thick and strong that nothing could pierce it. He ran toward Fenrir and planted that boot on the wolf's lower jaw. Then he grabbed the upper jaw with his bare hands, the same jaws that had just devoured his father, and he pulled. The god's strength was in him, the fury of a son who had watched his father die, and Vidar ripped Fenrir's jaws apart, tearing the great wolf's mouth open until he could reach inside and rip out the beast's heart. Fenrir died, avenged the wolf who killed Odin, slain by Odin's own son. Elsewhere on the battlefield, other prophesied duels played out. Thor confronted Jormungandr, the serpent he had fought before, the creature he had once tried to fish from the ocean when disguised and visiting a giant. Now they faced each other with no tricks, no disguises, just god and monster in final combat. Thor's hammer struck the serpent's skull, crushing it, killing the world serpent. But even in death, Jormungandr's venom poured out. Thor managed to take 9 steps away from the serpent's corpse before the poison overcame him. The god of thunder fell, dead, his hammer still clutched in his hand. Tyr fought Garm, the hound of hell, and they killed each other, both falling with mortal wounds. Heimdall and Loki faced off, old enemies who had been at odds for ages, and they slew each other with simultaneous blows. Freyr fought bravely against Surtr, but without his sword, he was doomed. The fire giant's flaming blade cut him down. The Einherjar fought and fell, thousands upon thousands of them dying their final deaths. No resurrection this time, just warriors who had died twice, once in the mortal world, and once again at the end of all things. The Valkyries fell, the giants fell, the dead from Naglfar were sent to their second deaths, and through it all Surtur walked, his sword blazing brighter and hotter with every moment. When the armies had exhausted themselves, when the gods had fallen and the monsters had been slain, when the field was covered with bodies and soaked with blood and poison, Surtur raised his sword and brought it down. Fire spread across the world. Yggdrasil, the great tree that had held the 9 worlds together since creation, caught fire and burned. The halls of Asgard collapsed in flames. Midgard, the world of men, was consumed. Even the sea boiled as Surtur's flames spread across it. The sky itself seemed to burn, and everything was smoke and heat and destruction. The world sank, the tree fell, and everything that had been created from Ymir's corpse, everything that Odin and his brothers had made, returned to the void from which it had come. Ragnarok was complete. The gods were dead. The world was destroyed. And Odin, who had sacrificed so much and learned so much and prepared so long, was gone, devoured by the wolf he had helped to bind. His wisdom and power and all his vast knowledge ending in darkness. The echo, but the story doesn't quite end there. Because in Norse mythology, Ragnarok is not just an ending, it's also a beginning. After the fires burned out, after the smoke cleared, after the earth had sunk beneath the waves, something began to stir. The world rose again from the water, green and fertile, new and untouched by the violence that had destroyed the old one. The sun's daughter, who had been born before the wolf's skull devoured her mother, rose in the sky and began her own journey across the heavens. Some gods survived. Vidar, who had avenged his father, lived. Vali, another of Odin's sons, survived as well. Thor's sons, Modi and Magni, found their father's hammer Mjolnir and took it up. Balder and Hod, who had been dead since before Ragnarok, returned from hell to walk the new earth. Other gods whose names are less well known also endured, emerging into a world renewed. Humans survived too. During the catastrophe, a man named Lif and a woman named Lifthrasir had hidden themselves in a place called Hodmimir's Wood, possibly a grove connected to Yggdrasil or a name for the world tree itself. They survived by drinking morning dew, and when they emerged, they found themselves in a fresh, clean world, ready to begin again. The new gods built new halls on the plain where Asgard once stood. They found the golden game pieces that the old gods had played with, relics of the time before, the fire, and they spoke of the old days, of Odin and Thor and Tyr and all the gods who had fallen. They remembered Ragnarok and learned from it, and Odin's legacy endured, not in his physical presence, for he was gone, devoured and destroyed, but in everything he had created and everything he had learned. The runes still existed, carved into reality itself. The wisdom he had gained from Mimir's well hadn't died with him, but had spread through the world in stories and songs and the very structure of the new cosmos. The humans who descended from Lif and Lifthrasir would tell stories of Odin, the Allfather, the one-eyed wanderer. They would carve his image on runestones and wear symbols sacred to him. They would invoke his name before battles and seek his guidance in difficult decisions. They would practice the magic he had learned and preserved. They would honor the warriors who fell in combat, hoping those warriors might join Odin in a new Valhalla, if such a place existed in the renewed world. In a way, Odin had won, not by preventing Ragnarok, which was impossible, but by ensuring that something survived it, that his wisdom and knowledge and the structures he had built would echo into the new age. He had created Valhalla, not just to fight at Ragnarok, but to establish the idea that death in battle was honorable, that warriors deserved to be remembered. He had learned the runes, not just for his own power, but to pass that knowledge to humans, to give them tools to shape their own destinies. He had been a god of contradictions until the very end, a king who wandered as a beggar, a warrior who preferred cunning to straightforward combat, a father who sometimes betrayed his own children for the greater good or for what he believed was the greater good, a seeker of wisdom who knew that all his seeking might be futile, but who sought anyway because that was who he was. And in the myths that the Norse people told, in the stories that have come down to us through the Eddas and the sagas, through runestones and archaeological finds, Odin lives on, not as a physical being, but as an idea, as a symbol of the relentless pursuit of knowledge, of the willingness to sacrifice for wisdom, of the understanding that even knowing you will fail doesn't mean you should stop trying. He gave his eye to see more clearly. He hung from the world tree to learn the runes. He raised the dead to question them. He wandered the 9 worlds in disguise to gather information. He built Valhalla to prepare for a battle he knew he would lose. And when that battle came, when Fenrir's jaws closed around him, he faced his death as he had faced everything else, with courage and the knowledge that he had done everything in his power to be ready. The Allfather is gone, but his story remains, told around fires on quiet nights, whispered in the wind that blows through empty halls, carved in runes that still speak to those who know how to listen. And in that way, Odin endures, not despite Ragnarok, but because of everything he did before it, everything he learned and taught and sacrificed. So as you drift toward sleep tonight, think of the one-eyed wanderer walking the roads between worlds, seeking wisdom in every shadow, finding knowledge in every sacrifice. Think of the god who hung from a tree to learn secrets that would not save him, but that he learned anyway, because the seeking itself was sacred. Think of Valhalla's golden halls and the warriors who feast there, training for a battle that has already been fought, existing now only in memory and story. And know that some hungers are never satisfied, some questions are never fully answered, and some stories never truly end. They just echo forward into the dark, waiting for someone to hear them and tell them again, keeping the old gods alive through the simple act of remembrance. If this helped you find some peace tonight, consider liking and subscribing. Let me know in the comments what part of Odin's story resonated with you most. And sleep well, knowing that somewhere in the vast cosmos of myth, the Allfather is still seeking, still wandering, still hungry for one more piece of wisdom, one more glimpse of truth. The gods have fallen, the world has burned and been reborn. But the stories remain. And as long as they do, Odin and all his contradictions, his sacrifices, his wisdom, and his failures will never truly die. Thank you for listening, and good night.